Have you ever met someone, and no matter how much time passes, you just can't forget them? Not because the love was perfect, not because the story was unfinished, but because something in you broke open when they left. And no matter how much you try to move on, how many books you read, how many people you date, how many times you tell yourself, "I'm over it," they still live somewhere inside you, like a song you can't get out of your head, like a dream that feels more real than your waking life. But what if this isn't love at all? What if the reason you can't let go is buried deep within you? Carl Jung believed that the people we're most drawn to are not always meant to stay, but to awaken something inside us. And when you can't let go of someone you can't be with, you may think you're stuck in love, but more often, you're stuck in a wound. This video isn't about blaming them. It's not about rewriting the past. It's not about getting them back or moving on faster. It's about confronting what that connection revealed about you. Because when someone comes into your life, touches your soul, then walks away, they don't just leave behind memories. They leave behind questions. Questions about who you are when you're truly seen. Questions about what you've been hiding from yourself. Questions about the parts of you that ache to be loved, but feel too broken to be lovable. And sometimes, the person you can't stop thinking about is just a mirror, a reflection of everything you've been afraid to face about yourself. You see, we're taught to believe love should last. We grow up on fairy tales and romantic comedies that tell us if a connection feels deep, if it moves you, if it changes you, it must be forever. So when someone leaves, we call it heartbreak, abandonment, rejection. We tell ourselves stories about timing, about circumstances, about fear of commitment or incompatibility or bad luck. But what if the narrative we've been telling ourselves is incomplete? What if what you're really grieving is not the person, but the feeling they awakened? What if what you can't let go of isn't them, but the version of yourself that existed when you were with them? Let me tell you about Sarah. Sarah was 28 when she met David at a conference in Denver. She was 3 years into a corporate marketing job that paid well, but left her feeling hollow, questioning everything she thought she wanted from life. She'd been single for 8 months after ending a relationship that felt more like a business partnership than a romance. David was different. He wasn't traditionally handsome, wasn't wealthy, wasn't checking the boxes that Sarah thought mattered. But when he talked about his work as a social worker, about the kids he mentored, about the way he saw beauty in broken things, something in Sarah came alive. For the first time in years, maybe ever, someone looked at her not as an achievement or a prize or a successful young professional, but as a soul. David saw through her polished exterior, her carefully curated LinkedIn profile, her ability to charm clients and navigate office politics. He saw something raw and real underneath, something she had forgotten existed. For 6 months, Sarah felt like she was living in color after years of black and white. David didn't just accept her sensitivity, he celebrated it. He didn't just tolerate her depth, he matched it. When she shared her secret dream of becoming a writer, he didn't laugh or suggest it was impractical. He asked to read her work. With David, Sarah felt chosen, important. Like her intensity wasn't too much, but exactly right. Like her need for deep conversation and emotional connection wasn't needy, but beautiful. When David ended things, gently, kindly, but definitively, explaining that he was moving back to Portland to care for his aging mother and didn't want to ask Sarah to uproot her life. Sarah was devastated. But here's what Sarah didn't realize for a long time. what she couldn't see, through the fog of grief and confusion, and that terrible sense of abandonment. She wasn't grieving David. She was grieving the version of herself that felt worthy of love. Let's go deeper into this, because this is where Jung's understanding of the psyche becomes essential. That person, the one you can't let go of, they didn't just make you feel alive. They didn't just make you happy or content or satisfied. They made you feel seen, and maybe for the first time in years, or perhaps for the first time ever, you felt chosen, important, wanted not for what you could provide or achieve or become, but for who you already were. But what if that intensity, that feeling of recognition and homecoming, and finally, someone who gets me? What if it wasn't really about them? What if it was about a wound, the part of you that has been aching from being overlooked, forgotten, unchosen, misunderstood? Pause here and take a breath. Is this what you've been carrying all along? That deep fear that you're too much or not enough, or somehow fundamentally unlovable as you are? This is where Carl Jung's concept of the shadow becomes crucial to understanding why we can't let go. The shadow isn't just our dark side, our jealousy, our anger, our selfishness. The shadow is everything we've pushed away about ourselves. Not just the parts we deem bad, but the parts we've learned are inconvenient, inappropriate, or unsafe to show. For many of us, especially those raised in families or cultures that prioritized achievement over authenticity, performance over presence, the shadow contains some of our most beautiful qualities. Our sensitivity, our need for deep connection, our intuition, our creativity, our willingness to be vulnerable. These parts of ourselves got pushed into the shadow, not because they were wrong, but because showing them felt dangerous. Because we learned through 1,000 small interactions and messages that being too emotional or too intense or too needy would result in rejection. So we learned to hide. We learned to perform. We learned to be the version of ourselves that was acceptable, lovable, safe. Carl Jung once said, "The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the entire ego personality, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort." When someone enters your life and touches that hidden part of you, the part that lives in your shadow, they don't just love you, they expose you. They shine a light on the places you've abandoned in yourself. Think about it. With this person, you can't forget. You probably felt more yourself than you had in years. You probably shared things you'd never told anyone. You probably felt safe enough to be imperfect, to need something, to want something, to dream something. And for a moment, through their eyes, you saw yourself as worthy of love, not despite your intensity, but because of it. The child in you who was told they were too emotional finally felt seen. The teenager who learned that being vulnerable meant getting hurt finally felt safe. The young adult who decided that needing someone was weakness finally felt permission to need. And once that happens, you can't unsee it, because suddenly someone has seen those hidden parts of you and stayed, at least for a while. And that changes everything. It's not that they were perfect. It's not that the relationship was without problems, or complications, or areas of incompatibility. It's that they made you feel safe enough to be imperfect. They made you feel worthy of love in your wholeness, not just in your achievements. But then they left, and now you're not just missing them. You're missing the version of yourself that felt worthy of being seen. You're grieving the death of the hope that someone could love all of you and choose to stay. Here's the truth that most people aren't ready to hear. You're not stuck in love. You're stuck in an unconscious contract. Somewhere deep inside, probably formed in childhood or adolescence. A younger version of you made a deal with the universe. If someone could just see me, really see me, and choose to stay, then I'd finally be enough. This isn't conscious. You didn't sit down one day and decide this. But experiences shape us, and if you grew up feeling conditionally loved, if affection came with performance requirements, if acceptance depended on being good or achieving, or not being too much trouble, then part of you learned that your worth was always up for negotiation. So when they don't stay, when this person who saw you so clearly, who made you feel so alive, who seemed to love the parts of you that you thought were unlovable, when they walk away, it doesn't just hurt. It reactivates a very old wound, a primal fear that you've carried for too long, that you're not lovable unless someone chooses you, that you're not safe unless someone validates your worth, that you're not whole unless someone sees your brokenness and stays anyway. But let's be honest about what this really is. That's not love, that's survival, and survival mode is not your destiny. Healing is. Let me share another story. This one might feel familiar because it's the story that so many of us carry. Marcus was 31 when he met Elena at a bookstore in Chicago. He'd spent years building walls, telling himself he didn't need anyone, perfecting the art of casual relationships that never went too deep. Marcus had learned early that wanting too much from people led to disappointment, so he'd become an expert at wanting just enough to avoid loneliness, but not enough to risk real heartbreak. Then Elena came along and saw right through his carefully constructed defenses. She didn't just accept his introversion, she celebrated it. Where other people had called him distant or cold, Elena saw depth. Where others had pushed him to be more social, more outgoing, more accessible, Elena loved his quiet intensity. She didn't just tolerate his complicated relationship with his family, she helped him understand it. When Marcus shared stories about his critical father and emotionally absent mother, Elena didn't try to fix him or offer easy solutions. She just listened, and in her listening, Marcus felt something he'd never experienced: complete acceptance. For 8 months, Marcus felt like he'd found his person. Not just someone who loved him, but someone who loved him without trying to change him. Someone who saw his sensitivity as strength, his need for solitude as self-awareness, his careful approach to trust as wisdom rather than damage. When Elena got offered a promotion that required relocating to San Francisco, she asked Marcus to come with her. It wasn't an ultimatum. Elena understood the complexity of his life, his job, his elderly father who lived nearby, the roots he'd finally started to put down in Chicago after years of feeling untethered. Marcus couldn't go. The practical reasons were real, but underneath them was something deeper. Terror of needing someone so much that he'd reshape his entire life around them. A fear that if he made Elena that important, that central to his world, she'd eventually realize what his father had seen, what his mother had known, that he was too much work, too complicated, too damaged to sustain love. Elena understood. She even said she admired his commitment to his father, his unwillingness to abandon his responsibilities. But understanding doesn't stop heartbreak. 2 years later, Marcus still thinks about Elena every day. Not constantly, not obsessively, but regularly, persistently, like background music that never quite stops playing. He's been on dates, he's met interesting women, he's even had relationships, but nothing feels like Elena. Nothing touches that deep place in him that she reached so effortlessly. And Marcus has convinced himself this means Elena was the one, that he made the wrong choice, that love like that doesn't come twice in a lifetime. But Marcus doesn't miss Elena. He misses feeling like someone could love him without trying to change him. He misses the version of himself that felt worthy of deep love. He misses believing that his complicated, sensitive, cautious heart was something to be treasured rather than tolerated. If this part hits something in you, keep going. The next few minutes might feel like a mirror, and mirrors can be uncomfortable, but they're also where transformation begins. This is what Jung called projection. We don't just love people. We love what they represent. We love what they awaken in us. We love how we feel about ourselves when we're with them. And often, what they represent is the healing we've been waiting for our whole lives. That person you can't forget? They became the answer to a question you didn't even know you were asking. Am I lovable as I am? With all my intensity, my needs, my wounds, my complicated heart. Am I worthy of someone choosing me not just once, but again, and for a moment, through their eyes, through their presence, through their way of being with you? The answer was yes. But when they left, the question came back louder than ever. Because if they could see you so clearly and love you so well, why didn't they stay? If you were truly lovable, wouldn't that love have been enough to overcome the obstacles? This is where our unconscious mind starts telling us stories. If I had been better, if I had tried harder, if I had been more flexible, more understanding, more willing to sacrifice. But these stories miss the deeper truth. Because somewhere along the way, probably long before you met them, you learned that your worth was conditional. You learned that love was something you had to earn. You learned that if you were just good enough, perfect enough, giving enough, someone would finally stay. This is the shadow contract we make without realizing it. If I can just find the right person to love me the right way, I'll finally love myself. But here's the truth that hurts. The truth that challenges everything we've been taught about love, about relationships, about happily ever after. You were never supposed to outsource your worth to another person. Even when they loved you beautifully, even when they saw you clearly, even when they made you feel whole, their love was meant to remind you of your worth, not to become your worth. You keep thinking they were the answer. That maybe, just maybe, if you had said the right words, made different choices, loved them better or more wisely or with more courage, they would have stayed. You replay conversations looking for the moment. You lost them. You imagine alternate timelines where you were braver, more open, more willing to fight for what you wanted. But what if their leaving wasn't a rejection of your love? What if their leaving was the gift your soul needed most? I know that sounds harsh. I know it doesn't feel like a gift. When you're lying awake at 3 a.m., wondering what you did wrong. When you're scrolling through old photos, rereading text messages, checking their social media for signs that they miss you too. But stay with me, because this is where Jung's understanding of individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, becomes essential. You didn't need another person to complete you. You needed a mirror, a soul reflection so raw and honest that you could no longer run from your wounds. And that mirror, it cracked you open, not to break you, but to reveal you. Think about Sarah again, the marketing professional who fell in love with David, the social worker who saw her soul. 2 years after David moved to Portland, Sarah is still single. But something fundamental has shifted in her. She started therapy, not to get over David, but to understand why his leaving felt like death. Why his absence triggered such profound grief that she couldn't function for weeks. Why the end of an 8-month relationship felt more devastating than the end of her 2-year engagement had felt. In therapy, Sarah discovered that her whole life she'd been performing worthiness, achieving her way to love, making herself indispensable so no one would leave. She'd learned early that love was conditional, that she was valued for her accomplishments, her usefulness, her ability to make other people's lives easier. Her parents loved her, but they loved her success more. Teachers praised her, but for her performance, not her person. Friends appreciated her, but often as the one who planned everything, remembered everything, held everything together. David was the first person who loved her without needing her to be impressive. He loved her questions, her doubts, her late-night existential conversations. He loved her sensitivity, her way of feeling everything deeply. He loved the messy, uncertain, creative parts of her that she'd learned to hide. In favor of being efficient and productive and professionally successful. And when he left anyway, when even that pure, accepting love wasn't enough to make him stay, Sarah realized something that changed everything. Her worth was never actually dependent on someone staying. It was never dependent on being chosen. It existed whether someone saw it or not. This realization didn't come easily. It came through months of grieving, not just for David, but for all the versions of herself she'd abandoned in the name of being lovable. It came through recognizing how much energy she'd spent trying to be perfect, instead of trying to be authentic. Sarah didn't heal by forgetting David or by replacing him with someone else. She healed by remembering herself, the self that existed before she learned to hide her intensity, before she learned that being too much was dangerous, before she learned to shrink to fit other people's comfort zones. She started writing again, not because David had encouraged it, but because it was part of who she was. She left her corporate job to freelance, taking a significant pay cut, but gaining something more valuable: alignment between her work and her values. Sarah began to understand what Jung meant when he talked about the transcendent function, the psychological process that helps us integrate our conscious and unconscious selves, that bridges the gap between who we think we should be and who we actually are. Take a moment and ask yourself, what did this person awaken in me that I'd forgotten about myself? What parts of me came alive in their presence? And how can I honor those parts now, even without them? This is the profound gift that Sarah received through losing David. She learned to give herself the validation she had been seeking from others. She learned that her worth wasn't dependent on someone else's recognition. She learned that she could be alone without being lonely, complete without being coupled, whole without being chosen. Marcus eventually understood this too, though his journey looked different. For the first year after Elena left, Marcus was consumed with regret. He second-guessed his decision to stay in Chicago. He imagined what his life would look like if he'd been brave enough to follow her to San Francisco. But gradually, through his own therapy and a lot of painful self-reflection, Marcus began to see the deeper pattern. He realized that his fear of going with Elena wasn't really about leaving Chicago. It was about his terror of being seen fully and found wanting. His whole life, Marcus had protected himself by being selective about who he let in. He'd perfected the art of being charming enough to attract people, but distant enough to avoid real intimacy. With Elena, for the first time, he'd let someone all the way in. And it was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure when she asked him to move with her. Part of him wanted to say yes immediately, but a deeper part, the part that carried old wounds about not being worth staying for, sabotaged the possibility. Because what if he followed her? And then she realized what his father had always implied, what his mother had demonstrated through her emotional absence, that he was too much work, too complicated, too intense to sustain love. Better to let her go and preserve the memory of being loved perfectly for 8 months than to risk having her love diminish under the weight of daily reality. But here's what Marcus learned. His fear of abandonment was so strong that he abandoned himself first. He chose the pain he knew: loneliness, regret, the safety of solitude, over the risk of being truly known and potentially rejected. Understanding this didn't make missing Eleanor hurt less, but it changed the meaning of the hurt. It was no longer about losing her specifically. It was about recognizing how much of his life he'd spent protecting himself from vulnerability. Elena hadn't just loved Marcus. She'd called him forward into a version of himself that was more open, more trusting, more willing to risk his heart. And even though the relationship ended, that calling remained. Because until you face that wound, the part of you still aching to be seen and chosen and loved for exactly who you are, you'll keep calling longing love and calling trauma destiny. You'll keep believing that the right person can heal what only you can heal. You didn't fail. You were never supposed to keep them. They weren't here to stay. They were here to awaken. You can't let them go, not because they were perfect, not because you're weak, not because you haven't tried hard enough to move on. You can't let them go because deep down, you still believe they were your answer. But the truth is harder and more powerful. They were your reflection, your awakening, your invitation to finally see what you've buried for so long. And that's why it hurts, because seeing yourself clearly, all of yourself, the beautiful and the broken, the lovable and the difficult, is terrifying. But pain isn't punishment. It's precision. It's your psyche's way of saying, pay attention. There's something here you need to understand. Carl Jung reminded us, the shadow is a moral problem that challenges the entire ego personality. For no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. And the person you can't forget, they didn't challenge your heart. They challenged your entire identity. The identity built on being good enough. The identity that depends on being chosen. The identity that mistakes being needed for being loved. This identity that believes your worth is determined by someone else's decision to stay. If you've made it this far, something in this message is speaking to a part of you that's been waiting to be heard. Don't rush past this feeling. Let it teach you something. This is individuation, Jung's term for the lifelong process of becoming who you truly are, separate from what others expect or need you to be. It's the journey of integrating all parts of yourself, including the ones you've learned to hide. And sometimes, the people who leave us are the ones who love us enough to refuse to become our escape from that journey. You don't need to forget them. You need to remember the version of you they helped you uncover, the you that exists without performing, the you that's worthy without achieving, the you that's lovable without being perfect, the you that can need someone without losing yourself, the you that can love deeply without making another person responsible for your wholeness. That version was always there. They just reminded you to look. And here's the beautiful paradox that transforms everything. You don't heal by replacing them. You heal by becoming the person who no longer needs them to feel whole. Not because you stop caring, not because you become cold or independent or emotionally unavailable, but because you finally understand love was never supposed to complete you. Love was supposed to celebrate you. The most profound relationships in your life, the ones that change you, that crack you open, that make you feel more alive than you've ever felt. They're not always meant to be permanent. Sometimes they're meant to be catalytic. They come into your life not to stay, but to activate something that was dormant, to awaken parts of yourself that you'd forgotten existed, to show you what's possible when you allow yourself to be fully seen. And then they leave, not because the love wasn't real, but because their work is done. They've delivered the message your soul needed to hear. You are worthy of deep love. You are capable of profound connection. You are brave enough to be vulnerable. Marcus is dating again, but now he approaches relationships differently. He doesn't look for someone to make him feel worthy. He looks for someone to share his worthiness with. He doesn't seek completion. He seeks companionship. He doesn't try to hide his intensity or his need for depth. He offers it as a gift. Sarah is still single, but she's no longer lonely. She's learned to give herself the validation she was seeking from others. She writes every morning before work. She travels alone and enjoys her own company. She has deep friendships, meaningful work, and a life that feels authentic rather than performative. When love comes again, and it will be to two people who are already whole, who have done the work of reclaiming their shadows, integrating their wounds, and learning to love themselves, not despite their imperfections, but because of their wholeness. This is the real love story, the one between you and yourself, the one where you learn to be the love you've been seeking, where you discover that you were never broken, just separated from parts of yourself that needed to be reclaimed. If this message touches something real in you, don't rush to let go, but pause to ask, what in me needed them so badly? And then hold that part gently, because that's where the real love begins. The person you can't let go of taught you something profound. You are capable of deep love. You are worthy of being seen. You are brave enough to be vulnerable. You are complex and beautiful and deserving of someone who celebrates your wholeness. They didn't take those gifts with them when they left. Those gifts are yours to keep, yours to honor, yours to offer, first to yourself, then to someone who's ready to receive them. You were never broken. You were never too much. You were never unworthy of staying. You were just waiting to be awakened. And now that you are, now that you've seen what love can feel like when it touches the deepest parts of you, the real journey begins. The journey of becoming the person who doesn't need someone else to feel whole, but who can share their wholeness with another whole person. The journey of loving yourself the way they loved you, completely, authentically, without conditions. The journey of understanding that some people come into our lives not to stay, but to show us who we're capable of becoming. Thank you for taking this journey with me. If this video helped you see something new about yourself, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And if you know someone who might need to hear this message, share it with them. Sometimes the most healing thing we can do is remind each other that we're not alone in this work of becoming whole. Until next time, be gentle with yourself. You're doing better than you think, and you're more lovable than you know.